Hello and welcome to my tutorial on how to draw a squirrel in coloured pencils. I start with the eye. I put in the white highlight before blocking in the black around in the pupil. I add a little bit of brown to the pupil to make it a little bit warmer than just the plain black. I use dark sepia on the shadow above the eye and start building up that shadowed area. I also use brown ochre as the base colour to block in. That'll make up the highlight spots in that shadowed area, and I also use black to further darken that shadow above the eye and down to the bridge of the nose. It's quite a dark spot on the squirrel in this picture, so it needs to be quite dark. I then went over the cheek area with ivory for building up the brown colours with brown ochre and terracotta. I also used burnt sienna in the shadowed areas to give the shadow a bit more of a redder colour rather than the grey that the dark sepia does. When you see me using the paintbrush, that's when I'm blending it out with Spectrum Odourless Solvent. It's a good solvent for blending the pigment together and getting rid of the white flecks in the paper. I continue building up the layers. I go over the cheek area with more ivory around the mouth, and I'm also using very short strokes at the moment. That's because the fur on the squirrel is quite short, and if you use long strokes then that will actually make it look strange because it'll look like it's got long fur where actually in fact it's short. So you make sure you do the strokes of the fur very short. I move on to the back of the squirrel and I do the same process with the different colours. Start with ivory, and then in this case on the back I use terracotta first because the back is a bit more red than the face, and I'm paying close attention to the reference photo for the direction of fur. It's important to get it right at this point because otherwise the fur will just look all wrong if you end up having bits over the shoulder going the wrong direction, because they change as the shoulder moves downwards towards the hand of the squirrel. At this point I am working in quite light layers, and that allows me to keep building up the layers to get the depth I want for the fur. And I put the layers down and then I blend it out, and then I repeat until I get the colour saturation that I want and the look of the fur that I want. As I move on to the white fur on the chest, I use ivory, but then I go over it in warm grey 3 to get the little fur strokes that I want in there. They are the shadows in amongst the clumps of fur. I then also go over the under the other arm with warm grey 5 and also add some other colours into that to make the grey look warmer. I use middle cadmium red and rose carmine along with terracotta to make that shadowed area look less flat. I decided that the fur colour wasn't quite right with the squirrel at this point, so I went over it with dark cadmium orange to make it look a lot brighter and just to add a more orange hue to the fur that I wasn't getting with the terracotta and the brown ochre that I was using previously. I go down to the paws and I just block them in with warm grey 3 and warm grey 5, as well as getting the black into the shadows on the log that the feet are resting on. And I also put a bit of the warm grey into the log to get the highlights. I've also gone over the log in brown ochre to get some of the nice colour in. I get the shadows in along the edge of the squirrel with black, and I also add a little bit more brown ochre to it, and then I just blend all of that out to get the nice smooth look of the shadow along the edge of the squirrel before going on to the rest of the log, and I block in the shadows with black, and then I go over it with brown ochre and burnt sienna in the different shadowed areas before blending it all out once again. I then take the ivory pencil and using a medium pressure I start adding in some of the highlights on that would. And you don't have to do a lot, but it's good to just sort of bring out some of the higher, the bumps which have the light hitting them, and get them to just sort of stand out just that little bit more. I continue doing the same thing with the top part of the log. I block in the shadows with black, and then I go over it with the burnt sienna and the brown ochre to get the different variations in the bark of the log. I also add highlights with the ivory and blend it all out with the odourless solvent. Up to the last part of the squirrel now, doing the tail, and I start with dark cadmium orange because it's quite red and orange, the tail is, and then I go over it with burnt ochre and brown ochre, as well as the terracotta and ivory. I add shadows with dark sepia and just keep building up those layers to get to the look I want. I also use burnt sienna and black in the shadows just to deepen them further. And I just keep blending and adding layers until I get to the look that I want. I also start refining the areas around the ears so that they look a little bit better than they did before. I use warm grey 5 to add some whiskers to the squirrel, and then I'm all finished with the squirrel. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, and thank you for watching. Bye.